Assalamualaikum. Good morning, everyone. We are from the second group. My name is Nabiilah Octavia and my partner Andini. We would love to present our topic entitled Cross-Cultural Understanding and Culture Shock. You might have heard about cross-cultural understanding, but what is actually? It concerns with understanding people from different cultural background or culture of the people so that we can construct our attitudes and worldview. We can also more tolerable and generous towards strange way that we may be shown by other citizens of another country. There are three goals why we should learn CCU. The first one is the knowledge aspect, the second one is attitude, and the third one is skills aspect. The first aspect is knowledge aspect. By having knowledge about cross-cultural understanding, we can understand cultural differences and being aware of different culture. We can also have a broader perspective of other culture.
Attitude aspect is one form of cross-cultural competence. Attitude aspects are aspects that related to behavior, which in studying CCU can foster a willingness to interact with other people. Then we are also expected to have an attitude of empathy and also tolerance. And the last one is openness, which means having the openness to other cultures and not saying that the right culture or the right values is the culture that we just embrace. The next is the skill or competency aspects. In studying CCU, we hope that we can have skills such as self-monitoring or self-control, which is we can see the good or bad behavior in ourselves. Then, in the skill aspect, we need relationship building. In this case, we can build relationships and trust well. Then, we also have the ability of persuasions, which can provide reasons, ideas, and other abilities about culture. And for the last important thing in the aspect of skill is good communication skill, which are related to the culture. The next part is about cultural shock. Let's talk about what is cultural shock. Culture shock is an event experience when we enter a foreign culture and have difficulty in understanding or predicting why people in that culture behave in ways different from those in which we behave in our own culture. Culture shock is a term used to describe what happens to people when they encounter unfamiliar surroundings and conditions, and it arises because of the difficulty in adapting to a new culture that includes all aspects in everyday life such as food, dress code, price of goods, and etc. In such situation, we may feel confused, inadequate, or frustrated, and this has a negative effect on our self-confidence. As a result, we feel unsure what to do in this new environment, not knowing what is appropriate or inappropriate. There are many problems in culture shock. The stress of change. There are various problems when many people experience culture shock. One of the problems is stress. This can happen when they move within their own culture and country, especially when there are geographic, climatic, and social differences between regions. When people move to different cultures, these differences are emphasized and therefore tend to cause greater stress. Most of people, when aiming to go to live or work in another country or culture, they often experience frustration and wonder about why don't these people act in the same ways as we do? So this result of frustration, feeling, and confusion. It very often happens from uncertainty about local confusion and not knowing how to go about it. About symptoms of culture shock. According to Obert in 1960, the experience of culture shock is a quite normal and predictable phenomenon and is not a sign of weakness, inadequacy, or some form of illness. And then the symptoms of culture shock can appear at the different times. Culture shock can manifest itself as showing signs of strain, bad temper, lack of sleep, a sense of loss and feeling of deprivation, homesickness, rejection, feelings of incompetence, and the others. In simple way, symptoms is that arise from culture shock, which can lead to expressions and thoughts in your head, like that. And then there are several problems that catch out in cultural shock, like cultural differences, time differences, non-availability of familiar food, children's education, ignorance of language, and value of conflicts. The stage of culture shock. Stage like honeymoon stage, crisis stage, recovery stage, and adjustment stage. Honeymoon stage. This phase is usually characterized by initial positive reaction, even of enchantment and fascination with the new culture, curious, enthusiasm, and at least superficial relationship with its people. Like the example, it occurs when a student goes to live in a foreign country. Upon arrival, the student feels happy, interested, and also curious learning about the new country and language in there. So it can be called that this is the honeymoon stage or the honeymoon period. So I can be conclude that in honeymoon stage, it has positive reaction, fascination with the new culture, curious, and enthusiasm. Meanwhile, it also different with the second stage of culture shock. The name is crisis stage. In this first stage, when problems start to emerge and culture shock arise. Cultural differences become apparent, resulting in feelings of frustration, disappointment, impatience, and even anger at familiar differences in language, values, signs, and also behaviors. Some problems may also arise over things like children's schools, accommodation, different consumer goods, and the others. So, this stage is often followed by a downturn in mood and increased frustration. So, I can be conclude that this stage has a culture shock arise, feelings of frustration, disappointment, and also even anger.
Next stage is called recovery or acceptance stage, where someone who's in culture shock, they finally show the development of confidence and positive attitude, and it characterized by an effort to learn a local language, and they also inquire about the culture and make a local friends. They also learn to adapt and finding better ways to deal with the negative feeling that they have as the result of culture shock, and their self-confidence is began to return. And the final stage is called adjustment, where they finally enjoying the new experience and also comfortable with the differences. And lastly, they also actively explore the new culture. There are also some reasons why someone is failed to adapt a new culture. This might be include they assume that their own country's habit or culture will be appropriate and reasonable in a new country or foreign culture. Another reason is also the lack of understanding that one's presence in another culture could be seen as a cause of conflicts. And another example is also they evaluating a local condition and habits against one's own value. Meanwhile, the ideal expectation should be the first is they start to adjust themselves, they start to adapt to their new surrounding, and finally they achieve cultural awareness. Here are the solutions or the coping strategies that will help the process of adaptation. We first have to be aware of what likely to pass on those 4 stages that we have been discussed previously on culture shock, and we should be aware that it's a normal process and it's not a sign of weakness or illness. We have also need to recognize with our own feelings when we feel lonely, unhappy, or homesick, and discuss the feeling with others so that you do not feel lonely anymore. We can also have to make effort. We need to make a new friend, both local and also other expat so that we can share our experience. We also need to make effort to learn and use the local language so that we do not feel or being discriminated by the local because we do not use their local language. I will show you some of the example of culture shock that you might not know. Food is also a part of the culture. It's the external part of the culture. You might not know that in German you likely to find a regular water. You will find a lot of sparkling water in Germany's supermarket because they love sparkling water so much. If you don't know what sparkling water is carbonated water or soda water. Germany loves to drink sparkling water.
Before we closing our presentation, here I want to explain how Islam views a culture. As we know that the world has a diversity of cultures and ethnicities and how it relates to the issue of culture shock. In here, I'm taking an example from the first verse of Surah An-Nisa. In the first verse of Surah An-Nisa, it has the meaning like, hai sekalian manusia, bertakwalah kepada Tuhanmu yang telah menciptakan kamu dari seorang diri, dan daripadanya Allah menciptakan istrinya, dan daripada keduanya Allah memperkembangbiakan laki-laki dan perempuan yang banyak. Dan bertakwalah kepada Allah yang dengan mempergunakan namanya kamu saling meminta satu sama lain, dan peliharalah hubungan silaturahim. Sesungguhnya Allah selalu menjaga dan mengawasi kamu. From the first verse of Surah An-Nisa, it can be concluded that there is a fact that humans come from the same ancestors and then they reproduce, so they become has a various tribes and nation. Therefore, there are various kinds of culture. Even though we have the different cultures, we as humans are obligated to maintain kinship between each other. It is also written in the hadith about the recommendation to stay in touch. This shows that from the point of view of humans must love each other, know each other, help each other, understand each other, respect each other, and they are able to adapt in various cultures so they can build a good relationship in the different cultures. I think it's all from our presentation, and thank you for your attention, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.